There are nights when the body is tired, but the mind refuses to rest. Thoughts keep running, worries replay like a broken record, and peace feels out of reach. You close your eyes, but sleep doesn't come. And in those moments, it can feel like you are alone in the silence of the night. But understand this, rest is not only a physical condition, it is also a state of surrender. Many people try to force sleep, but sleep is not forced, it is received. When the mind is overloaded, when the heart is anxious, when the spirit is unsettled, the body follows the same unrest. So the real battle is not just in the bed, it is in what you are carrying within. You are not designed to live in constant tension. Your mind was not created to carry every burden at once. And yet so many people lie awake replaying mistakes, fearing tomorrow, or carrying stress they were never meant to hold alone. True rest begins when you release what you cannot control. There is a peace that comes when you decide, even in the middle of the night, that you are not responsible for fixing everything before morning. Some things will still be there when you wake up, but you don't have to carry them through the night. Your body responds to calm rhythms. A warm, soothing herbal drink like chamomile or similar natural calming teas can help signal your body to slow down. But more important than anything you drink is what you allow your mind to release. Slow breathing, quiet reflection, and stepping away from screens can help your system reset into rest mode. But deeper than physical habits is this truth. Peace is something you allow in. When you stop fighting every thought and instead anchor your mind in calm assurance, your body begins to follow. Sleep often comes not when you chase it, but when you stop wrestling with the night. You don't have to earn rest. You don't have to deserve sleep. You simply need to receive it. And when the night feels heavy again, remember this: even the longest night still ends with morning. The darkness is never permanent. It only feels endless when you are in it, but it always breaks. So lay down your thoughts. Release your tension. Let go of what you cannot fix right now and allow your mind and body the permission to rest. Sleep is not something that can be commanded by force, and this is where many people struggle without realizing it. The more they try to control it, the more it slips away. When the body is lying on the bed but the mind is still active, sleep becomes distant because rest is not simply about physical stillness, it is about inner surrender. The human system is designed in such a way that it responds to peace, not pressure. When pressure rises in the mind, the nervous system stays alert as if it is preparing for a problem that has not yet arrived. This is why a person can be exhausted yet unable to sleep. The body is tired, but the mind is still working overtime. There is a deep truth here that many overlook. Sleep is a natural gift that flows when resistance stops. It is not something that can be chased down or captured by effort. In fact, effort often becomes the very thing that blocks it. The moment a person begins to say, "I must sleep right now," the mind becomes more aware of not sleeping, and that awareness creates tension. Tension and rest cannot exist in the same space. So the more attention is given to forcing sleep, the more the mind stays active, analyzing every sensation, every thought, every passing minute. This is why rest is closely connected to trust. When a person is carrying worries into the night, those worries do not disappear just because the lights are turned off. Instead, they settle into the silence and become louder. The mind begins to replay conversations, imagine outcomes, and predict problems. It is in this state that sleep becomes difficult because the inner world is still engaged in unresolved matters. But when there is a release of that internal burden, something shifts. The mind begins to loosen its grip, and the body follows that signal. Think of how nature operates. No flower forces itself to bloom at night. No river tries to flow faster because it is being watched. Everything in creation follows a rhythm, and rest is part of that rhythm. The human body is no different. It has its own built-in design for recovery, renewal, and stillness. But that design only works properly when it is not interrupted by constant mental noise. When thoughts are racing, it is like trying to tune an instrument while someone keeps changing the strings. There is no harmony, only disturbance. This is also why environment alone cannot guarantee rest. A perfect room, a comfortable bed, and complete silence can still fail if the inner state is unsettled. On the other hand, even in imperfect conditions, a calm mind can drift into sleep because it is not resisting the natural process. The real foundation of sleep is not external, it is internal alignment. When the mind agrees to slow down, the body responds immediately. It is almost as if the body has been waiting for permission to relax. Another important aspect is understanding that thoughts are not enemies, but they are not meant to dominate the night either. When thoughts are acknowledged but not engaged, they lose their power to disturb. Many people make the mistake of fighting thoughts, and in doing so, they give those thoughts more strength. But when thoughts are observed and released without attachment, they begin to fade naturally, like waves losing energy as they reach the shore. The body also communicates constantly. Heavy breathing, tight muscles, and restlessness are signals that the system is still in a state of alertness. These signals are not random, they are responses to mental activity. When the mind slows down, the breathing deepens, the muscles loosen, and the entire system begins to transition into rest mode. This transition cannot be rushed. It happens gradually, like a sunset that cannot be hurried but only experienced. Ultimately, sleep becomes effortless when resistance ends. It arrives not through struggle but through letting go. The moment a person stops trying to control the outcome and instead allows the natural process to take over, the mind begins to settle. In that settling, rest becomes possible again, not as something achieved, but as something received. Anxiety and overthinking are often the hidden thieves of rest, quietly working in the background long after the day is ended. When the world becomes silent at night, the mind does not always follow the same silence. Instead, it begins to amplify everything that was ignored, postponed, or emotionally carried throughout the day. This is why so many people lie in bed physically exhausted, yet mentally active, as if their thoughts have suddenly been given permission to speak louder in the dark. The absence of external noise does not create peace automatically, it simply reveals what was already happening inside. Overthinking is not just thinking too much, it is thinking without resolution. It is the mind looping through the same concerns, searching for certainty in places where certainty does not exist. D. During the day, distractions can temporarily suppress this cycle. Work, conversations, screens, and responsibilities occupy attention, keeping the mind externally focused. But at night, when those distractions fade, the mind turns inward. And whatever has not been processed emotionally often rises to the surface in the form of repeated thoughts, imagined scenarios, and unanswered questions. Anxiety adds another layer to this experience. It is not always based on immediate danger, often it is based on anticipation. The mind begins to project into the future, trying to prepare for outcomes that have not yet happened. It creates possibilities, then reacts to those possibilities as if they are real. This creates a loop where the body responds to imagined stress with real physical tension. The heart may beat faster, breathing may become shallow, and muscles may tighten, all because the mind is responding to thoughts rather than reality. In this state, sleep becomes difficult because the body remains in a subtle form of alertness. What makes this even more powerful at night is the stillness itself. In silence, thoughts do not have competition. A small worry that would normally pass without notice. Tice during the day can feel much larger when everything else is quiet. The mind begins to replay conversations, analyze decisions, and revisit moments that cannot be changed. It searches for control in situations that are already complete. This mental activity creates emotional energy, and that energy keeps the nervous system active, preventing the natural descent into rest. There is also a pattern where anxiety feeds on itself. One thought leads to another, and before long, the mind is no longer dealing with one issue, but constructing an entire chain of connected worries. A simple concern about tomorrow can expand into fear about failure, relationships, health, or uncertainty about the future. This expansion is not intentional, it is automatic. The mind is trying to solve everything at once, but instead of finding solutions, it becomes overwhelmed by its own activity. The body responds directly to this mental state. It does not distinguish between real and imagined threats. To the nervous system, a thought of danger can feel similar to actual danger. This is why overthinking at night can produce physical symptoms such as restlessness, discomfort, or the inability to remain sick. LL. The body is simply mirroring the condition of the mind. When the mind is active, the body follows. When the mind is calm, the body begins to relax. Breaking this cycle requires awareness of what is happening internally. Many people try to force sleep while their mind is still engaged in unresolved thinking. But sleep does not arrive in the middle of mental activity. It arrives when mental activity begins to slow down. This slowing does not happen through force, but through release. When attention is no longer feeding every thought, those thoughts begin to lose strength. They are not eliminated by struggle, but by disengagement. It is also important to recognize that not every thought requires a response. The mind will generate thoughts continuously, but engagement is optional. When every thought is treated as important, the mind stays active. When thoughts are allowed to pass without attachment, their influence weakens. This creates space inside the mind, and in that space, calm begins to emerge naturally. Over time, the mind can be trained to separate thinking from reacting. This does not mean suppressing thoughts, but rather observing them without becoming absorbed. When this shift happens, the nighttime experience changes. Instead of being a battleground of worries, the mind becomes quieter, less reactive, and more settled. In that settled state, anxiety loses its grip, overthinking slows down, and the body finally receives the signal that it is safe to rest. At the deepest level, rest begins where control ends. Most people do not struggle with sleep because they lack the ability to rest, but because they are mentally holding on to things that cannot be fixed in that moment. The mind has a tendency to believe that if it keeps thinking long enough, worrying hard enough, or replaying situations repeatedly, it will eventually arrive at a solution. But in reality, many of the things carried into the night are not solved by thinking, they are only intensified by it. This is where the quiet principle of release becomes essential. Releasing control does not mean ignoring responsibilities or pretending problems do not exist. It simply means recognizing the difference between what can be addressed now and what must be left for later. Night is not designed for problem solving, it is designed for restoration. Yet many people bring the weight of unfinished thoughts, HTs, unresolved emotions, and future uncertainties into a time that is meant for recovery. This creates internal conflict because the body is trying to rest while the mind is still working. When two opposite states exist at the same time, rest becomes difficult. The need for control often comes from a desire for safety. The mind believes that if it can think through every possible outcome, it can prevent disappointment or pain. So it continues to analyze, predict, and rehearse situations in advance. But this mental effort creates the opposite effect. Instead of producing security, it produces tension. The more the mind tries to control everything, the more overwhelmed it becomes by the sheer number of possibilities it generates. This is why letting go is not a loss, it is a form of relief. When a person begins to release control, something subtle but powerful happens. The internal pressure starts to decrease. The mind no longer feels responsible for holding every outcome together. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer carry the same emotional weight. They begin to pass more freely without being held or amplified. This reduction in mental resistance allows the nervous system to shift from alertness into calmness. The body senses that it is no longer in a state of constant problem solving, and it begins to relax accordingly. Letting go also requires acceptance of limitation. There is a point where effort reaches its boundary, and beyond that boundary, only trust remains. Not everything can be resolved instantly, and not every question has an immediate answer. When the mind accepts this truth, it stops fighting the present moment. Instead of trying to mentally force solutions, it allows time to do its work. Time often resolves what effort alone cannot, but only when the mind stops interfering with constant mental activity. The act of holding on creates invisible tension in the body. Muscles tighten, breathing becomes shallow, and the nervous system remains partially activated. This is because the body interprets mental holding as ongoing responsibility. Even if a person is lying still, the internal state communicates urgency. But when control is released, that urgency begins to dissolve. The breath deepens naturally, the muscles soften, and the entire system starts to recognize that it is safe to slow down. There is also emotional weight attached to control. People often hold on not just to tasks or plans, but to fears, regrets, and expectations. These emotional layers are what make letting go difficult. The mind may replay past mistakes, trying to rewrite outcomes that are already complete. Or it may project into the future, trying to ensure success or avoid failure. But both directions pull attention away from the present moment, which is the only place where rest can actually happen. When control is loosened, attention returns to the present. And in the present, there is nothing demanding immediate action in the middle of the night. The body is already lying still, the environment is already quiet, and the mind no longer has to carry forward momentum. This alignment between environment, body, and awareness creates the conditions where rest becomes natural rather than forced. Releasing control is not a one-time decision, it is a repeated internal shift. It is the moment-by-moment choice to stop engaging with thoughts that demand unnecessary urgency. Each time a thought arises that tries to pull the mind into problem solving, there is an opportunity to step back from it rather than step into it. Over time, this creates a habit of mental softness instead of mental resistance. And in that softness, something important happens. The mind stops acting as if it must carry everything alone. It begins to settle into trust that not everything requires immediate resolution. In that settling, the weight lifts, the pressure decreases, and rest becomes not just possible, but inevitable. Simple calming habits may appear small on the surface, but they play a powerful role in preparing the body and mind for rest. Sleep is not only a sudden switch that happens at night, it is the result of a gradual transition from activity to stillness. When the nervous system has been active throughout the day, it cannot instantly shift into deep rest without some form of signal that tells it to slow down. This is where consistent, gentle practices become important, because they help guide the body out of alert mode and into relaxation mode. The human body responds strongly to rhythm and repetition. When certain calming actions are repeated regularly, the brain begins to associate them with rest. Over time, these habits become cues that signal the end of activity and the beginning of sleep preparation. For example, reducing exposure to screens before bed helps limit stimulation from light and information. Bright screens keep the brain engaged as they are linked with activity, alertness, and response. When this stimulation is reduced, the brain begins to shift its focus inward, allowing natural drowsiness to develop. Breathing is another powerful tool that directly influences the state of the nervous system. When a person is stressed or overthinking, breathing tends to become shallow and irregular. This sends signals to the body that it is in a state of alertness. However, when breathing becomes slow, deep, and intentional, it communicates safety to the nervous system. The body interprets this as a sign that there is no immediate threat, which allows tension to reduce naturally. Over time, the heart rate begins to slow, muscles begin to loosen, and the entire system moves toward calmness. Warm and soothing drinks can also support this transition, not because they force sleep, but because they create comfort and routine. A warm drink signals relaxation and can gently prepare the digestive and nervous systems for rest. The key is not the substance itself alone, but the act of slowing down and creating a moment. Too long pause. When a person sits quietly with a warm drink away from distractions, it becomes a moment of separation from the busyness of the day. That separation is important because sleep does not arrive in a mind that is still fully engaged in external activity. Another important calming habit is creating a consistent sleep environment. The body responds to familiarity. When the same space is used regularly for rest, the brain begins to recognize that environment as a place for sleep rather than activity. Darkness, quietness, and comfort all play roles in reducing stimulation. Even small adjustments, such as dimming lights or reducing noise, can signal to the brain that the day is ending and rest is approaching. Gentle movement before bed can also help release physical tension. Throughout the day, stress often accumulates in the body without conscious awareness. Muscles tighten, posture becomes rigid, and energy builds up in areas like the shoulders, neck, and back. Light stretching or slow movement allows this stored tension to release gradually. When the body feels physically lighter, it becomes easier for the mind to settle as well, because physical tension and mental tensio are closely connected. What makes these habits effective is not intensity but consistency. They do not need to be complicated or time-consuming. In fact, simplicity is what makes them sustainable. A few intentional actions repeated daily are more powerful than occasional effort. When the body learns a predictable pattern, it begins to follow it naturally without resistance. It is also important to understand that these habits are not meant to force sleep, but to create conditions where sleep can arrive naturally. Many people make the mistake of trying too hard to sleep, which creates pressure. But calming habits work in the opposite way. They reduce pressure. They do not demand sleep, they invite it. This difference is subtle but significant. Emotional calmness also plays a role in these practices. When a person slows down their external activity, they also create space for internal reflection. This is where the mind begins to process the day in a softer way. Instead of rushing through thoughts, it begins to settle them. This emotional unwinding is part of the transition into rest, because unresolved emotional energy often keeps the mind active. Ultimately, calming habits work. By signaling safety to the entire system, mind, body, and nervous system. They help shift the state from doing to being, from activity to stillness, from tension to ease. And in that gradual shift, the natural ability to rest begins to reappear, not as something forced, but as something gently allowed. Peace is not something that arrives randomly or by accident. It is something that is consciously allowed. Many people spend their nights searching for peace as if it is an external object they must find somewhere outside themselves. But peace does not come from chasing, it comes from yielding. It is the result of a quiet inner decision to stop resisting the present moment. When the mind stops struggling against what is already happening, a natural stillness begins to emerge. That stillness is what allows the body and mind to enter rest. The idea of receiving rest rather than earning it is important because it removes pressure from the experience of sleep. A common misunderstanding is that rest must be achieved, as if it is a reward for completing enough tasks or solving enough problems. This creates an unconscious burden where the mind feels it must finish everything before it can and relax. But life is not structured in a way where everything is ever fully complete. There will always be something unfinished, something uncertain, or something unresolved. If peace depends on completion, it will never truly arrive. When peace is seen as something that is received rather than achieved, the internal approach changes completely. Instead of striving, the mind begins to soften. Instead of forcing outcomes, it begins to release them. This shift is subtle but powerful. The nervous system responds immediately to this change in posture. When striving decreases, tension decreases. And when tension decreases, the body naturally begins to prepare for rest. Sleep is not separate from this process, it is the final stage of it. One of the greatest barriers to peace is resistance. Resistance appears when the mind argues with reality, when it says things should be different from how they are. This inner conflict creates constant mental friction. Even in silence, the mind remains active because it is trying to mentally rewrite situations that are already fixed in the past or not yet within reach in the future. This creates a divided state within the self, where one part is trying to relax while another part is still fighting. Peace cannot exist in division, it exists in acceptance. Allowing peace means stepping out of that internal struggle. It does not mean agreeing with everything or ignoring challenges. It simply means acknowledging the present moment without adding extra mental resistance to it. When the mind stops fighting the current state of reality, it becomes lighter. And in that lightness, rest becomes more accessible. The body follows the direction of the mind, so when mental resistance decreases, physical tension also begins to fade. There is also a deep emotional layer involved in allowing peace. Many people carry unresolved emotions into the night, regret from the past, worry about the future, or frustration from the day. These emotions create internal noise that keeps the mind engaged. But when a person allows themselves to simply be present with those emotions without trying to suppress or amplify them, something changes. The emotional intensity begins to lose its grip. It does not disappear instantly, but it becomes less dominant. This reduction in emotional intensity is what creates space for calmness to grow. Peace is often blocked out by external circumstances, but by internal resistance to those circumstances. Even when the environment is quiet and comfortable, the mind can remain restless if it is still holding on to internal conflict. This is why two people in the same environment can have completely different experiences. One may feel calm while the other remains disturbed. The difference is not external, it is internal acceptance. Allowing peace also requires trust in the process of rest itself. The body has an innate ability to recover, but it functions best when it is not interfered with. When the mind constantly tries to manage sleep, control timing, or monitor progress, it disrupts the natural flow. But when control is loosened and trust is introduced, the system begins to regulate itself more effectively. The body knows how to rest when it is given permission to do so. This permission is not given through words alone, but through surrender of effort. It is the moment when the mind says in a quiet way that it is no longer necessary to figure everything out right now. That decision reduces mental load significantly. And as that load decreases, the internal environment becomes more suitable for rest. Ultimately, peace is not a destination reached after all problems are solved. It is a state that becomes available the moment resistance is released. It does not require perfection in life, only willingness in the present moment. When that willingness is present, the mind becomes quieter, the body becomes softer, and rest begins to unfold naturally, not because it was forced, but because it was finally allowed. Even the longest night carries a truth that is often forgotten in the middle of struggle. It is temporary. No matter how still, heavy, or endless the night may feel, it is always moving toward an ending. Darkness never sustains itself permanently, it exists in cycles, and every cycle has a turning point. When someone is lying awake, caught in thoughts and restlessness, it can feel as if the night has no end. But that feeling is created by perception, not reality. Time continues to move forward regardless of how the mind experiences it, and with every passing moment, the night is already becoming shorter. This awareness is important because perception has a powerful influence on emotional experience. When the mind believes something is endless, it reacts with pressure and frustration. A restless night feels heavier when it is interpreted as something permanent. But when the mind understands that this state is temporary, the internal pressure begins to soften. Even if sleep has not yet arrived, the emotional weight of waiting begins to decrease. This shift in perspective alone can reduce tension significantly, allowing the body to gradually relax. Many people suffer more from the fear of not sleeping than from the actual lack of sleep itself. The mind begins to measure time, counting hours, estimating how much rest is left, and calculating the consequences of being tired the next day. This mental activity increases anxiety, which in turn keeps the nervous system active. But when attention moves away from measuring time and toward accepting the present moment, something changes internally. The urgency begins to fade, and with it, the pressure to force sleep also decreases. Night is designed to transition into morning. This is not just a poetic idea, but a natural law of rhythm. The earth rotates continuously, and every moment of darkness is already in motion toward light. Even when everything feels still, change is happening quietly and steadily. The body itself operates in similar rhythms. It moves through cycles of alertness and rest, activity and recovery. When the mind aligns with this natural rhythm instead of resisting it, rest becomes more accessible. The sense of endlessness often comes from being fully immersed in the present difficulty without remembering that it is part of a larger flow. When someone is in discomfort, attention narrows, focusing only on what is currently felt. This narrowing creates the illusion that nothing else exists beyond the current moment. But expanding awareness helps restore balance. Remembering that there was a beginning to the night and that there will be an end to it reintroduces perspective. The situation becomes smaller in emotional intensity even if it remains unchanged physically. There is also a psychological effect that occurs when the mind realizes it does not need to solve the experience of the night. Sleep does not come through control, it comes through continuation. The body does not require constant supervision to transition into rest. In fact, excessive monitoring can interrupt the process. When the mind relaxes its observation and stops trying to manage every second, the natural rhythm of the body begins to reassert itself. Even in moments of wakefulness, the body is still moving through restorative processes. Heart rate adjusts, breathing patterns shift, and internal systems continue working in subtle ways. Rest is not only defined by sleep itself, but also by the gradual reduction of activity. So even if sleep feels delayed, the body is not stagnant, it is still moving toward recovery. This understanding helps reduce the sense of helplessness that often accompanies sleeplessness. The belief that this will never end is one of the most draining mental patterns during the night. It creates emotional exhaustion on top of physical tiredness. But when that belief is replaced with a simpler truth that every night passes, just as every night before has passed, the emotional load becomes lighter. The mind no longer fights the situation as intensely because it recognizes that it is moving through a temporary phase, not a permanent condition. Morning does not arrive suddenly, it approaches gradually. The first signs of change often happen quietly before they are noticed. In the same way, the shift from wakefulness to sleep also happens in subtle stages. The mind begins to slow, thoughts become less structured, and attention drifts more easily. These small changes are indicators that the system is already transitioning, even if full sleep has not yet occurred. When this perspective is embraced, patience replaces frustration. Instead of battling the night, the mind begins to move with it. And in that movement, resistance fades. The body feels less pressured, the mind becomes less reactive, and rest begins to emerge naturally. Not as an event forced into existence, but as a process already unfolding toward completion. Rest begins the moment a person decides to stop carrying what was never meant to be carried through the night. This is not a physical action, but an internal release, a quiet surrender of mental weight that has been accumulating throughout the day. Many people go to bed still mentally active, holding conversations that have already ended, problems that cannot be solved at that hour, and fears about what has not yet happened. The body may be lying down, but the mind is still standing, still working, still trying to manage life as if the night is another workspace. This inner state prevents rest from naturally unfolding. To lay down thoughts means to consciously stop engaging with them as tasks that must be completed immediately. Thoughts will always arise, that is the natural function of the mind. But not every thought requires attention, analysis, or response. When a thought appears in the mind at night, it often feels important simply because of the silence around it. In quietness, even small concerns can feel larger than they are. But importance is not always real urgency. Many thoughts are simply echoes of the day, mental leftovers that do not need to be processed immediately. Releasing thoughts is not about suppressing them or pushing them away. In fact, resistance often strengthens them. The more a person tries to force thoughts out of the mind, the more present those thoughts become. Instead, laying them down means allowing them to exist without interaction. It is the difference between holding something tightly and placing it down gently. When something is held, it requires energy and attention. When it is placed down, it no longer demands effort. This shift in engagement is what allows the mind to quiet itself. The human mind has a habit of looping, especially at night. It revisits conversation. Ursations, replays decisions, and anticipates future outcomes. These loops are often driven by a desire for certainty or control. The mind believes that if it keeps thinking, it might eventually arrive at clarity or resolution. But most nighttime thoughts do not lead to solutions, they lead to more thinking. This creates a cycle where mental activity continues without conclusion, keeping the nervous system active and preventing rest from taking over. When a person begins to lay down their thoughts, they interrupt this cycle. Instead of following every mental thread, they allow thoughts to pass without continuation. A thought may appear, but it is not extended into a story. It is not analyzed or expanded. It is simply observed and then released. Over time, this practice reduces the intensity of mental activity. Thoughts still come, but they lose their grip on attention. There is also an emotional component to laying things down. Many thoughts carry emotional weight, regret, worry, frustration, or anticipation. Holding on to these emotions keeps the mind engaged and the body tense. But when emotional attachment is loosened, the same thoughts lose their influence. They become less urgent, less demanding, and less disruptive. The emotional system begins to settle because it is no longer being repeatedly activated by mental engagement. This process is closely connected to trust. Letting go of thoughts requires a kind of internal trust that everything does not need to be solved at once. It requires accepting that the night is not the time for resolution, but for restoration. When this trust is present, the mind feels less responsible for managing every detail of life simultaneously. That reduction in responsibility creates space for relaxation. The body responds immediately to this internal shift. When mental engagement decreases, physical tension begins to ease. The shoulders drop, breathing becomes more natural, and the nervous system starts to transition away from alertness. This is because the body and mind are deeply connected. When one releases pressure, the other follows. Sleep is not something separate from this process, it is the natural continuation of it. Laying down thoughts also creates distance between awareness and mental activity. Instead of being fully absorbed in thinking, a person begins to observe thoughts from a slight distance. This creates a sense of space inside the mind. In that space, thoughts no longer feel overwhelming. They become quieter, less intrusive, and easier to let go of. That distance is what allows rest to enter. Ultimately, rest is not achieved by adding more effort, but by removing unnecessary mental weight. The night becomes easier not when all thoughts disappear, but when they are no longer carried. When the mind stops holding everything tightly, it becomes light enough for sleep to arrive naturally. In that lightness, rest is no longer something pursued, it becomes something that happens on its own when the mind finally allows itself to stop holding on. What often stands between a restless mind and deep rest is not the absence of solutions, but the presence of self-reliance that refuses to pause. Many people unknowingly carry the belief that everything depends entirely on their own mental effort. They feel that if they stop thinking, planning, or analyzing, things will somehow fall apart. This creates an internal pressure that does not allow the mind to settle. The body may be tired enough for sleep, but the mind remains active because it believes its duty is still unfinished. In reality, rest back comes possible only when the mind steps out of the illusion that it must manage everything alone. The idea of carrying everything by oneself is emotionally heavy. It turns life into a constant responsibility that never switches off. Even at night, when the world becomes quiet, this inner sense of duty continues operating. The mind begins to rehearse tomorrow, revisit yesterday, and try to maintain control over outcomes that are not currently in its hands. This continuous mental engagement keeps the nervous system in a state of alertness, even when there is no real need for action. Sleep struggles to emerge in an environment where responsibility feels endless. Letting go of this burden does not mean abandoning responsibility in life. It means recognizing limits. There is a difference between what requires action and what requires surrender. Not every situation can be solved through immediate thinking, especially in the middle of the night. Some things are simply meant to be placed aside until the appropriate time. When the mind accepts this, it stops trying to compress all of life's demands into a single moment of rest. That reduction in mental load is what allows relaxation to be. Egan. There is a deep relief that comes when a person realizes they are not required to hold everything together at once. Much of nighttime anxiety comes from the belief that constant mental activity is necessary for stability. But in truth, stability does not come from overthinking, it comes from balance. And balance requires knowing when to engage and when to release. When engagement continues without pause, exhaustion builds. When release is practiced, restoration begins. The nervous system is highly sensitive to perceived responsibility. When the mind believes it is carrying too much, the body responds with tension. Muscles tighten, breathing becomes shallow, and the internal system remains partially activated. This is not because there is immediate danger, but because the body is following the signal of mental pressure. When the belief of, I must handle everything is softened, the body receives a different message. It begins to understand that it is safe to stand down. Trust plays a central role in this shift. Trust is not about ignoring reality. It is about acknowledging that not everything requires immediate control. When trust increases, mental resistance decreases. Mind stops trying to solve life all at once and begins to allow things to exist without constant interference. This creates internal space, and that space is where rest naturally develops. There is also a quiet humility in accepting that not everything is within personal control. Life contains many elements that unfold without permission or prediction. The more the mind tries to dominate every outcome, the more exhausted it becomes. But when it accepts its limits, a sense of relief replaces pressure. That relief is not weakness, it is wisdom. It is the understanding that peace is not found in total control, but in appropriate release. At night, this understanding becomes even more important because the mind is most active when the body is least able to act. This mismatch creates frustration. The body wants rest, but the mind continues working. When the belief of total responsibility is relaxed, this conflict begins to dissolve. The mind no longer feels the need to stay fully alert, and the body is allowed to follow its natural rhythm. There is also a shift that happens in identity. Instead of seeing oneself as the sole manager of every outcome, there is a quiet recognition that life continues beyond individual effort. This does not remove responsibility from daily life, but it prevents responsibility from becoming a burden that extends into every moment. Night becomes a space for restoration rather than control. When this internal shift takes place, the experience of the night changes. Thoughts lose their urgency because they are no longer treated as immediate tasks. The mind becomes less reactive, more spacious, and less burdened by constant mental effort. In that spaciousness, rest begins to surface naturally. Ultimately, sleep is not just a physical process, but a mental release from unnecessary weight. When the belief that everything must be handled alone is set down, the mind stops tightening itself around life. And in that loosening, rest becomes possible again, not because everything is solved, but because everything is no longer being carried at once. But there is something greater controlling your response. It is called the fear of God. The fear of God is not being afraid that God wants to destroy you. The fear of God is having such deep reverence for Him that you refuse to let temporary emotions make permanent mistakes. It means you value God's opinion above your anger. It means you would rather obey heaven than satisfy your flesh. Some people think your silence means weakness. They think your calmness means you have forgotten what they did. They mistake your grace for ignorance. But what they do not understand is that your restraint is spiritual maturity. You remember every betrayal. You remember every tear. You remember every sleepless night. You remember how they smiled in your face and stabbed you in your back. But you also remember that vengeance belongs to God. You understand that God did not call you to become bitter. He called you to become better. The enemy wants your pain to turn into hatred. He wants your disappointment to poison your future. He wants you to become so consumed with revenge that you miss your destiny. But God says remain clean. Do not allow dirty people to contaminate your spirit. Do not let toxic individuals change your character. Do not lose your peace trying to prove a point to people who were committed to misunderstanding you. Sometimes the greatest victory is walking away with your integrity still intact. Sometimes the greatest revenge is becoming everything they said you could never become. Sometimes your greatest weapon is your silence. You are not greeting them because they deserve honor. You are not showing respect because they earned it. You are doing it because your relationship with God matters more than your temporary feelings. Your discipline confuses people. Your peace irritates people. Your success will silence people. While they are focused on drama, God is preparing your table. While they are spreading lies, God is opening doors. While they are plotting against you, God is promoting you. Never allow people beneath your calling to pull you beneath your character. God sees every hidden tear. God sees every betrayal. God sees every injustice. And in his perfect timing, he will deal with every situation. Your responsibility is not revenge. Your responsibility is obedience. Keep your heart pure. Keep your hands clean. Keep your eyes on God. And one day, the same people who ignored your worth will witness God elevate your life in ways they never imagined. Stay faithful. Stay disciplined. Stay prayerful, because God will honor those who honor him. And when your story is finally revealed, everyone will know that our restraint was not weakness, it was worship. There are moments in life when your emotions will demand a response that your spirit cannot afford to give. There will be seasons where people will push your patience to its limit. They will disrespect you, betray your trust, lie about your intentions, and treat your kindness as weakness. Your natural human reaction will be to respond with the same energy they gave you. Your flesh will tell you to get even. Your pride will tell you to prove a point. Your pain will tell you to make sure they feel what you felt. And if you are being honest, there are some people who have hurt you so deeply that everything in you wants to completely erase them from your life. You do not want to hear their voice. You do not want to see their face. You do not even want to acknowledge their existence. The wounds they created were real. The betrayal was real. The disrespect was real. The disappointment was real. But when you fear God, your emotions no longer sit on the throne of your life. The fear of God means you understand that God is watching how you respond when you are offended. It means you care more about pleasing him than satisfying your anger. T means you recognize that one emotional reaction can create consequences that last for years. Many people have destroyed relationships, opportunities, ministries, careers, and families because they allowed temporary anger to control permanent decisions. One moment of uncontrolled rage can damage a lifetime of favor. One impulsive decision can create years of regret. That is why spiritual maturity is often revealed through restraint. Anyone can react. Anyone can scream. Anyone can fight. Anyone can insult. Anyone can seek revenge. But it takes real discipline to stay quiet when your emotions are loud. It takes real faith to trust God when you feel mistreated. It takes real strength to walk away from situations that could poison your future. People may look at your silence and think you are weak. They may assume you are afraid. They may believe they got away with hurting you. But what they fail to understand is that your silence is not weakness, it is obedience. You are silent because God has been too good to you for you to throw away your peace over temporary people. You are silent because your destiny is too valuable to be interrupted by unnecessary drama. You are still. And because God is teaching you that not every battle deserves your energy. Some battles are distractions sent to delay your purpose. The enemy knows he may not be able to destroy your future, so he tries to provoke you into destroying it yourself. He wants you offended. He wants you bitter. He wants you reacting emotionally so that you step outside of God's will. But wisdom says remain still. Wisdom says pray before you speak. Wisdom says let God fight battles you were never assigned to fight. When David had the opportunity to destroy Saul, he refused because he feared God more than he hated his enemy. Saul was chasing him, trying to kill him, and attacking his destiny. Yet David understood that vengeance belonged to God. That is true strength. True strength is not shown through revenge. True strength is shown through restraint. When you fear God, you begin asking different questions. Instead of asking, how can I get back at them? You ask, how can I honor God in this situation? Instead of asking, how can I make them regret hurting me? You ask, how can I protect my peace? Instead of asking, why did this happen to me? You ask, what is God teaching me through? GHTHTS, that mindset changes everything. God is not just concerned about what people did to you. He is also concerned about what pain tries to turn you into. Do not allow betrayal to make you bitter. Do not allow rejection to make you hateful. Do not allow offense to make you lose your character. Stay disciplined. Stay prayerful. Stay focused. Silence is one of the most misunderstood forms of strength. In a world that celebrates loud reactions, quick comebacks, and public revenge, many people assume that if you choose not to respond, you must be weak. They think if you walk away from drama, you are afraid. They think if you refuse to argue, you have nothing to say. They think if you remain calm while being disrespected, they have somehow defeated you. What they fail to understand is that silence often requires far more strength than retaliation. Anyone can lose control. Anyone can raise their voice. Anyone can post their anger online. Anyone can expose people publicly. Anyone can react emotionally when they feel hurt. That takes no discipline. That takes no maturity. That takes no wisdom. But remaining calm when your emotions are screaming for revenge requires a different kind of strength. It requires self-control. It requires patience. It requires faith that God sees what happened even when nobody else does. There are people who are waiting to see you break character. They are hoping you will react emotionally so they can justify what they did to you. They want your response to become the distraction that shifts attention away from their actions. That is why you must be careful. Some battles are traps. The enemy knows he cannot always stop your blessings, so he creates opportunities for emotional reactions that can delay what God has prepared for you. He places difficult people in your path, hoping your frustration will produce foolish decisions. One angry conversation can destroy years of relationships. One emotional text message can ruin opportunities. One public outburst can damage your reputation. One uncontrolled reaction can create consequences you never intended. That is why mature people understand the value of silence. Silence gives you time to think. Silence gives you time to pray. Silence gives you time to allow emotion